Good morning, everyone. Thank you to those of you who've joined us so promptly this morning, and welcome to Trialogue September webinar. As I'm sure most of you know, we host these webinars monthly on the last Thursday of every month. So yeah, you can mark your calendars. Next month will actually be our last for this year. But today we're going to be exploring a critical topic of how business and corporate social investment in particular can integrate water management into their strategies and their social impact. So water security is obviously not just a national concern, but a global one. And businesses have a vital role to play, not only in their core operations in looking at how to reduce, reuse, and recycle water, but also a role to play in ensuring that communities, especially vulnerable ones, have equitable access to water. So that's what we'll be exploring this morning, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. We have some great panelists on board. I'd like to take a minute to thank the Rand Water Foundation for supporting this webinar. We do have a representative on the panel today, but they have supported this topic, this important topic on the Trialogue platforms for many years. And in fact, they sponsor the water and sanitation topic on the Trialogue Knowledge Hub. And I would encourage you to visit that Knowledge Hub, where you'll find a lot of information, case studies on how companies are addressing water and sanitation, particularly through their CSI. So thank you to Rand Water. Then just a few technical notes before we kick off. So firstly, there are two ways to engage in this morning's webinar. The first is through the chat, which is enabled. So you are welcome to chat to fellow delegates, to introduce yourselves, to comment on the content in that chat. If you do want to ask a question, and I do encourage you to do this because we do have great panelists, then please use the Q&A box. So don't put your questions in the chat, please. Put them into the Q&A box. I will be, in the moderated part of the discussion, I will be taking questions from that Q&A box. Please address the questions to one or more of the panelists and make them as succinct as possible so that they can be read out. Then when the webinar is over, and we have actually extended the length of these based on the feedback that we got through these surveys. So a short survey will come up at the end of the session. It should take you less than 5 minutes. So please do share your thoughts on future topics, how we can improve the webinars, and what you'd like to hear about. Then I know we always get asked, so just to confirm that the webinar is being recorded, and we will be writing up summary notes. The recording and the summary notes will be shared with everyone who registered via email, and we will also be loading those on the Trialogue Hub, on the Trialogue Knowledge Hub. Okay. So our agenda for today, I will do a short introduction. Then we'll move to the opening statements by our panelists. We have Mashudu Funzani, who's the program manager of the WASH programs at the Rand Water Foundation, Peter Vandal from the NEPAD Business Foundation, and Justin Smith from WWF. They will each give a short opening statement. Followed by that, there will be a Q&A session, and you'll see that that's actually the bulk of the webinar. So I do have a few questions for our panelists, but I encourage you all to use that Q&A box and put your questions for the panelists in there. Okay, so Abdullah, if you can just bring up the first poll. We just want to see who's in the audience so far. I know people are still joining. I can see you coming in. Just to get a sense of who most people in the audience are. I actually see in the registration quite a few new names. So while you're doing that, I just want to do a short introduction to Trialogue. I don't actually think I introduced myself. I'm Kathy Duff, one of the directors at Trialogue, and I oversee the thought leadership. Trialogue is a consulting firm in responsible business. We have two broad areas of work. The first is consulting services. Here we work with companies on their social impact strategies, on monitoring and evaluation, on ESG advisory, and also on corporate reporting. And then our other area of work is thought leadership. And here we produce the annual Business and Society Handbook, which we're busy on for this year. It'll be published towards the end of the year. We run an annual Trialogue Business and Society Conference that's usually in May each year, and we're busy planning for May next year, as well as these monthly webinars. And I have mentioned the Knowledge Hub. I know from the registration list, a lot of you are involved in water, have an interest in water. And as I mentioned, there is a topic on the Knowledge Hub sponsored by the Rand Water Foundation on water and sanitation. During COVID, we also launched the Trialogue Academy, which is an online learning platform where you can learn more about corporate social investment and development. So Abdullah, could you share the results of that poll? I see around a third of our delegates are nonprofit organizations. And then if we look at big and small business together, we've got around a quarter and quite a good number of government and consultants in the audience. So I think a great mix this morning. Thank you. Okay, so I just will give a short background. And while I'm actually talking, Abdullah, if you can put up the second poll, which basically just wants to get your view. And I know when we put these up, we ask for a single choice. What is the most effective strategy for reducing water risk and increasing resilience within South African communities? Obviously, there's never one perfect strategy, but we're just forcing you to make a single choice so that we get a sense of what the most kind of priorities for the people on the call. So South Africa's water crisis is obviously no secret. For those of you in Cape Town, you've experienced getting very close to day zero. And there's now talk of Joburg approaching day zero. And if you are in Joburg, you've probably had quite a few water cuts already this year. South Africa ranks as one of the 30 driest countries. We are a water scarce country. And this has been exacerbated by climate change, as well as by mismanagement and infrastructural challenges. So over 50% of our water supply in South Africa is used for agriculture and increasing droughts and floods. So at the same time in the country, we've had severe droughts as well as floods, which are impacting water availability and quality. Over half of South Africa's wastewater treatment works are dysfunctional and require refurbishment, according to the Department of Water and Sanitation. And almost half, so 48% of our water is actually lost or unaccounted for. So many issues. And then just what you'll see on the slide is the two main frameworks from the government for addressing these issues. The first is the National Water Resource Strategy 3. This is the third edition. It's the legal instrument for implementing and operationalizing the National Water Act. The third edition was launched last year, and it responds to the National Development Plan, as well as the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. It provides a policy framework to ensure that water security and equitable access to water and sanitation is available in South Africa. It focuses on managing demand, enhancing supply, and addressing climate impacts. It aims to strengthen governance and infrastructure by 2025, to improve water quality and accessibility by 2030, and to build a sustainable water management system beyond 2030 in line with the National Development Plan. Again, from the National Development Plan is the National Water Security Framework that looks to the future and provides a comprehensive plan to strengthen water security across South Africa. Okay, Abdullah, can you just share the results of that poll, please? And the top two getting the most votes, so 42% saying the most effective strategy is promoting water conservation awareness and behavioral change. And the second highest, that a third of our delegates investing in water infrastructure repairs and upgrades. Okay, thank you. And I'm asking the panelists to please take note of these because we can discuss more about them when we come to the Q&A session. Okay, so that's a very broad context, which I'm sure most of you on the call are aware of. If we drill down at CSI in particular, which is where Trialogue does its research, we actually find that there's not that much support of water and sanitation through corporate social investment. Obviously, a company's biggest impact can come through their core business and looking at their operations and their water use. They're reducing that, looking at the sources, looking at reuse and recycling. But if we zoom in on CSI, there's two areas where companies support water and sanitation through their CSI. One is the development sector that we call housing and living conditions, and the other is environment. But in that left-hand chart, you'll see that both of those sectors actually receive a very small amount of average CSI expenditure. So housing and living conditions receives only 4% of CSI expenditure on average, and environmental causes only 3% on average. Again, I think most companies are addressing environmental and water issues in their core business, but it's just interesting to see, how they are addressing it through their CSI, and we'll talk more about that in the discussion. If we look at the breakdown then, within those two sectors, you'll see the top right-hand graph does show that water and sanitation was the biggest area supported in the housing and living conditions sector. And it was also the biggest biggest focus area in the environmental CSI support was water conservation and wetlands management. And on that note, if we can bring up poll 3, please, Abdullah. Which just asks you, what should CSI practitioners prioritize to ensure sustainable water management? And again, we're asking you to force a single priority or choice. So I'll just give you a minute to answer that. I can see about half of you have voted. Those that haven't, if you could just vote. Okay, Abdullah, if we can share the results of that one. So interestingly, we're seeing here that the biggest category is around collaborating with municipalities to improve water and sewage management. So it's actually quite a different result from what we saw in the previous poll, which showed that the education and awareness was the biggest priority there. But for the CSI, we've seen that it's actually working with local municipalities in communities, in areas to improve water and sewerage. Interestingly, very few of you seen that advocacy is the best option for CSI. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the discussion, and I'm going to introduce each of the panelists, and they're each going to give an opening statement, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. So as mentioned, if they do say something that you want to question or get more information about, please pop that in the Q&A box. I'm going to hand over first to Mashudu Funzani, who's the Program Manager of WASH Programs at the Rand Water Foundation. Mashudu, thanks for putting your camera.
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Kathy. Good morning to all the participants. My name is Mashudu Funzani. I'm the manager responsible for water sanitation and hygiene within Rainwater Foundation. Primarily, Kathy, I'm responsible for the following programs and project activities. The first one being community sustainable water supply, which is communities' water supply. Primarily here, we are actually drilling boreholes, especially in rural areas. The boreholes that are actually installed with filtration units, which actually make sure that the water that is coming out of there is safe for drinking purposes. The second one, Kathy, is the adequate and dignified sanitation facilities, where we are constructing ablution facilities in rural areas and semi-rural areas, making sure that those dignified sanitation facilities are able to assist communities and their dignity is restored. The third one is capacity building of non-governmental organizations and SMMEs, where we are actually capacitating them and supporting them and make sure that they get opportunities within Rainwater Foundation. And the last one is community education and water use efficiency, where we are contracting service delivery partners such as our NGOs, so that they can assist our communities in terms of community education, the significance of paying the bills, and making sure that the communities are aware of the significance of water losses. And thank you, Kathy. That's all from my side. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Mashudu, for providing that overview of your different focus areas in the foundation. I'll come on to ask a little bit more about each of those when we move to the Q&A. But for now, if I can ask Peter Vandel from the NEPAD Business Foundation to come on. So the NEPAD Business Foundation leads the Strategic Water Partnerships Network. If you could just tell us a little bit about that network, what its primary objectives are, and how it works with companies and civil society and nonprofits, who obviously are most of our audience today.
Thanks very much, Kathy, and thanks for allowing us to join you today. The Strategic Water Partners Network is a little over a decade old, launched through the World Economic Forum as a partnership model. The core guidance at the time, which remains true today, was to work through partnerships between the public and private sectors to close the supply-demand water gap that you were referring to earlier. So we've had a number of successful initiatives over the years in the agricultural sector and municipal sector and mine water sector, to the extent that it was awarded the State of the Art Water Partnership of the World award a few years back. It is a co-chaired arrangement, with the co-chairs being the DG of the Department of Water, and the current private sector co-chair is Alyssa Jooste from SAB ABM Bev. The reflections are, whilst we have many successes over the years, we've recognized that we are getting into a very tricky situation, as you mentioned earlier, Kathy. And over the last couple of years, I've really tried to up the ante in terms of what the Strategic Water Partners Network can do to support water security in the country. So there's essentially three main buckets that we work against, with the primary being around leadership, working with executive level leadership across the country in alignment with the Department of Water's needs. So through that, we're really trying to get very good clarity of understanding of what the issues are and what the levers are that we can pull, and how we can replicate similar approaches from the energy and logistics sector where they have the crisis committees. Importantly, as part of our leadership, we are trying to be very public in our communications and sharing with everybody what the situation is, what the facts are, what everybody can do to support water resilience across the country. At the core of our work is our partnerships. As a neutral convening platform, we are able to arrange task teams from time to time around very specific water issues to see if we can create supporting projects. One of the focus areas is our water stewardship working group, which is an open platform to share information with all water sector interested bodies and people. And through this, we share information like a community of practice on how to do water stewardship at an industrial, domestic level, how can we work with municipalities, how can we share information on the water situation in various locations. And then very specifically, we have a couple of core task teams, with the first being our work in non-revenue water. So working with municipalities on reducing their water demand. That's a very core focus area and a big drive by the Department of Water as well. On the second hand, we also very much part of the Gauteng Water Security Initiative and participate around the structures that are in place to support closing the supply-demand water gap we have in Gauteng specifically. And then we deliver a number of projects with specific municipalities, typically in the non-revenue water space, targeting reducing water demand within those municipalities. So the ones that we have active at the moment are Polokwane, Nelson Mandela Bay. We're also working with Rand Water and Johannesburg Water, and are currently establishing in Rustenburg, Ekurhuleni, and Tshwane. So a number of very specific interventions. I'll come back to the link to CSI later, but that just gives you a little bit of an overview of where we are as a platform. Maybe just to note, you mentioned the National Water Strategy earlier, Kathy. The SWPN is specifically mentioned in that document as a partnership between multi-stakeholders to drive reducing water demand across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, that sounds like you're doing a lot with a lot of task teams, and that's, as I mentioned, there's many people on this webinar who in that sector. So I hope that they all get in all that information and are part of that, the working group, the water stewardship working group you were talking about. Okay, I'm going to ask Justin Smith to come on now. He's the head of business development at WWF. Non-profit organizations are often at the front line of water management initiatives. So Justin, if you could just open with which water programs WWF runs and how partnerships with companies and their CSI support this work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kathy, and hi, everyone. So as WWF South Africa, we've really chosen to focus in on what we call the strategic water source areas in South Africa. So those are the key catchments that provide the majority of our surface water. It's 10% of our land surface, but really provides about 50% of the water that we have, powers about 2/3 of our economy in terms of both the agricultural sector as well as our key kind of metropolitan areas. And I guess it's a little bit of a reality game in that we know with all of the challenges we have around water from availability, from access, and from a quality side, we can't unfortunately protect every water resource in South Africa. But we feel that if we could at least make sure our strategic water source areas are properly secured, that gives us a really good chance in terms of being able to work through the resilience challenges that we have in South Africa. I think that the other context for us is that we know that there's a number of challenges around budget and capacity in terms of managing water resources at various levels in South Africa. So we try in each of the strategic water source areas to develop local partnerships to really coordinate activities, bring together all of the key stakeholders from a government perspective, from a traditional leaders perspective, local communities, business, other NGOs, and really try and craft solutions for that particular water source area that look at the risks and opportunities that exist there. There's some, I guess, common issues across the 22 strategic water source areas. So issues like alien and invasive plants are quite significant, and obviously clearing alien plants is one good way of really improving kind of water availability in the key upper catchments all the way through our systems. And that comes with some really good job creation opportunities in often deep rural communities as well. So I think from a CSI perspective, one of the real positives of really looking at water issues is both the environmental and social benefits that come together in this particular area. Looking at alien invasive plant species work also, leaves you with the biomass kind of opportunity afterwards that can be crafted into other business opportunities, whether it's in the biochar space, in the sort of energy space, etc. So it's a very integrated cycle, and I think an important one to look at from both a corporate and an NGO perspective. We also know that looking at alien clearing and then restoration afterwards comes with significant biodiversity benefits, and that's a really big kind of momentum space at the moment from a global and national perspective as well. So I think, again, water is an important entry point into conversations at a corporate level around biodiversity management and understanding impacts as well. A lot of the companies we work with are looking at their value chain risk when they look at strategic water source area partnership work, recognizing that their dependency on nature and on the kind of ecological infrastructure that exists is really critical. So their ability to kind of reinvest into those areas is a very central part of taking responsibility from that perspective. So we work with about 25 different companies, largely in the food and bev, forestry, kind of banking and insurance sectors, who all understand the potential risk either around their value chain or around their kind of agricultural books or investments as well. And it's become a really great collaborative space, I think very similar to the Strategic Water Partners Network in different sectors kind of working together around solutions as well. Really good to see some of the companies we work with like Mondi and others on the call as well. At the same time, we also recognize we're not located in every single community in every single water source area. So we work with a lot of local NGOs as key implementing partners in those different communities. So we've got about 20 different NGOs that we collaborate with to look at local solutions that are relevant for each particular area. And then we already try and build in the kind of agricultural support and responsible agriculture practices, look at protected area expansion as a key part of securing the strategic water source areas. And that also really helps us deliver to our national targets around the global biodiversity framework. So I think to kind of sum up, water is an incredibly important entry point in really bringing partners together. I think opening companies to really understand their risk and opportunities in their supply chain and take more responsibility as well. And for us to really bring communities and local NGOs and sort of support and capacitate their work in particular areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. And I think you've highlighted so well how water just impacts all these other areas, job creation, agriculture, biodiversity, health, so many knock-on areas that a company might be addressing and not necessarily thinking about the water, but there's clear synergies there and clear other benefits from addressing some of these water issues. Okay, we're going to move to some questions. I'm going to start off. I see that some people are putting questions into the chat. Please, can you rather use the Q&A box it's either at the bottom or the top of your Zoom screen, and put your questions in there, addressing them to a panelist, because I'll pick them up from there. But I'm going to start with Mashudu. So you gave us a high-level overview of your different focus areas, the boreholes, the ablution facilities, the supporting the SMEs, working with municipalities. Could you provide a few examples or a few case studies of successful programs, and who you've partnered with in these programs and how they've worked? Thanks, Mashudu.
Well, thank you, Kathy. I think in my preamble, Kathy, it's also important to indicate, to introduce some of the activities which are secondary activities. I actually mentioned the primary activities, but with the Rainwater Foundation, there are secondary activities that we are currently undertaking. For instance, your Rainwater Cares, which is philanthropic in nature. The second one being social enterprise, which deals primarily with the bottling of water. The third one being jobs creation and optimization. which primarily deals with the jobs creation. So I felt that it's quite significant that I introduced also the secondary activities. Yes, there's case studies, Kathy. We have actually done a lot of work in the area of Mfuleni local municipalities, Merafong local municipality, Kavenembeki, as well as City of Johannesburg, which are areas of supply. I must indicate, Kathy, that it's different projects that we have undertaken, but that stand out for me for the foundation is domestic water leaks. In the area of Randfontein, Tukomsares, Simunye, and as well as Beckersdal, we have been able to actually retrofit more than 6,000 households, saving the municipality 13% of water losses. In the area of Mfuleni as well, in the area of Sharpeville, in the area of Everton, Sebokeng, those are the areas that we have worked as well, where we have retrofitted more than 10,000 households there and saving them about 15% of water losses in terms of non-revenue. So that's the significant role that the foundation has played. And also in partnership with NGOs and partnership with municipalities, we have been able to identify certain NGOs to assist us in terms of community education and awareness raising and water use efficiency. So those are the two case studies that I can mention for now, Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mashudu. I think we're getting some nice examples of the actual work that your organizations are doing, like fixing water leaks and, in Justin's case, clearing alien species. And what I want to come to just now is how these types of things might be included in other CSI programs that maybe focus on youth or other elements, but could include some water activities. Peter, I'm going to ask you a similar question, just around providing a case study, a bit more detail on one of the programs. You spoke about a number of task teams that you have, and maybe we can go in on the Gauteng Water Security Initiative. I know all the people in Joburg or in Gauteng here are probably concerned about the water. Just speaking a little bit on one of those case studies, please, and looking at how it involved companies and nonprofits. So Peter, you're on mute at the moment.
Thanks, Kathy, for helping there. So I'm going to take in a little bit of a journey to how we get to the case studies. And I think it's important to know where we've come as a Water Partners network. So I mentioned in my introduction that our focus has been on reducing the supply-demand water gap that we have in the country. So from the early onset, we started to look at, to resolve that problem, you've either got to increase supply or reduce demand. So we focus very much on the reducing demand side. And within that space, identified the opportunity to work with municipalities on non-revenue water and reducing the demand in municipal areas. So the first intervention in that space was to work with the Department of Water on creating what you will know now as the No Drop program. So you will have seen the No Drop, the Blue Drops, the Green Drops that have been recently published. We worked very closely with the Department of Water to create the No Drop, which effectively allows us now to measure municipalities in terms of what their water wastage is. So I think that's been a hugely useful tool for us to all have visibility on what the current situation is. Particularly noting that, I think from the department's point of view, they see non-revenue water as such a key enabler. This is where you plug the gaps in your operational budgets, and this is where you recover your revenue. So to do anything to improve the service delivery in the water sector, you need to focus on non-revenue water. So from there, as the first results of the No Drop came out, I think 2015 it was kind of what now? And we were approached by two companies, in this case, SAB and Anglo American, who are both big water users in their own right in Polokwane, to see what they could do to support the local municipality in this case, to reduce water demand. Why? Quite simply, they've done everything they can as organizations to reduce their demand and diversify the supply, yet there's still a risk related to water security in their operations. So there was a need to step outside the factory fence. So through this partnership with Polokwane, did a number of things from developing the non-revenue water strategy and business plan for the city to implementing a series of projects that are part of the business plan. These relate to replacing bulk meters, servicing and installing pressure reducing valves, as well as customer meters and the like. We also realized that the problem was much bigger than what the organizations themselves could provide as support, and supported the municipality with a funding, finance, legal, regulatory piece of work to look at what are the real funding opportunities for the municipality to support them to raise the full budget required for non-revenue water interventions. In terms of outcomes, really, really good results in the sense that the interventions that we put in place effectively would have paid themselves off in 3 months. So good return economically. And then also from the finance point of view, we were able to see that there are options for the city available to raise funding for non-revenue water interventions. There was a limit to how far we could take it, because obviously we can't do the full capital planning function for the city. They had many things to think about. And that project we've now handed over to the Water Partnerships Office, who are now supporting with the transaction advisory work to do a performance-based contract. So a really good demonstration project. Just very briefly, from there we moved to Nelson Mandela Bay during their crisis. What was pleasing for us is that SAB came with us on the journey, obviously recognizing the value of the partnership, and have implemented a very similar intervention in Nelson Mandela Bay. We are literally just getting the results in at this point in time, but there was the potential certainly for about 3 megalitres a day of water savings in the areas that we were operating and supporting. So there's some learnings, and maybe this is where I'll stop for this part of the discussion. We can come to Gauteng a little bit later if you wish. And I guess there's 2 main learnings. The first is that there's a very strong business case around non-revenue water projects. The second is around sustainability, and there is the opportunity to leverage corporate and development community contributions via revolving funds. So the payback of these projects is critical. So doing it through a non-profit organization, we can effectively then start to do phases. As we complete the first phase and the value of the water savings is accrued, we can then refund into those interventions and start to do a bigger scaled up version of these types of projects. I think the important part for us is our business, and we're very conscious that it's not in business's interest simply to fund projects that are government in nature. So we're mainly working with big water users, and what we've realized is these non-revenue water projects have a huge opportunity to reduce operational risks due to water reliability. There's also creating opportunities for companies that have ESG obligations, or what's the word, ESG aspirations to be water neutral. So in this instance, we are able to package these projects as water credits effectively through an audited process to help ESG reporting. And I'll come into this a bit more detail just now, but I think the big aha moment for us in the CSI front is you can package these as different projects that can start to support job creation. A little bit like Mashudu mentioned earlier, the retrofitting projects in townships, we're packaging those as job creation projects. We also have other opportunities to package as health projects, for example, working with some of the hospitals that have water demand issues themselves and package those as health projects. So that's what we're trying to get our head around at the moment. Obviously looking to work with other partners like yourselves to see how we can cross-purpose different types of spends, but achieve our outcome, which is about reducing water demand and improving water resilience. So I'll stop there. We can come into a bit more detail just now. We have a number of these partnerships that are now kicking off, particularly in Gauteng. So many opportunities in that space.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, thanks for reiterating just the cross-sector nature of water, and also, I mean, the clear business case, a 3-month payback, sounds pretty amazing, as well as the fact that that companies can do all they can and yet still have huge risks. So they really do need to look outside of their business and at the communities and at the supply around them. They can't just focus on their own operations. And I think that's an important point that you made. Justin, I'm going to come to you, and sorry, I'm jumping around in the questions that I sent, but just given the results of that first poll where our delegates highlighted the importance of awareness and training, and I know you've spoken about the water sources, but being your key focus area for water, but what role do you think education plays and awareness? And how could other CSI programs incorporate some awareness and education, water awareness and education in their work?
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, I think with such a complicated issue like water, we need a whole number of integrated solutions. So starting from influencing policy at a government level, working through, improved understanding within the business sector, within the NGO sector, and broadly with South Africans as well. I know you mentioned Day Zero in Cape Town about 6-7 years ago, a little bit earlier. And I mean, it did prove to be a really effective communication case in terms of shifting behavior, in terms of water use within a city, some of which has been fairly well maintained over time as well. So I think there are still opportunities to really grow the understanding of the challenges we face around water, and that as frustrated as we sometimes get with the challenges we face, we do have a role to play in being more responsible around our water management practices, both as individuals as well as within the business space as well. And then I think looking at kind of incentives as an opportunity as well. So some of the work we do in the strategic water source areas, particularly with grazing associations, to look at their kind of practices, is really about incentivizing change as well. So sometimes that's about looking at improved kind of water access. Sometimes it's about veterinary services for livestock management as a kind of lever for change as well. So I think we need to look at what are the key issues that will incentivize businesses and communities to shift some of their behavior in a more positive direction, and try and make sure we do those, because I think the kind of penalty space hasn't necessarily worked that well so far. Also because I think, water is not necessarily costed at the most accurate level in terms of the true kind of cost of getting water from a kind of high upper catchment to a tap in Gauteng. Particularly if you think that the majority of Gauteng's water comes from Lesotho or from the Northern Drakensberg strategic water source areas 400-500 kilometers away. That's an incredibly complicated journey to get it into a tap in Pretoria or Johannesburg. And I think we kind of estimate what's required to really provide water access and water availability. So we need to kind of address all of these issues together. And I think educating, informing South Africans about some of these complexities is part of that process.
Thanks, Justin. You're right, Day Zero and a scare can certainly do it, but I also like your discussion around incentives, carrots rather than the sticks, to try get behavior change. And the first sentence you said actually leads to my next question, which I was going to put to Peter, but to any of you that would like to respond, which is around advocacy. So you've actually all given lovely examples of collaboration, and we can and given those in the case studies, and how all of these networks and partnerships, you're working with municipalities, with government, what is the role here of advocacy, and which organizations are doing the advocacy? I don't know, Justin, if you want to take that, or Peter.
I'll start, and I'm sure Peter will add as well. So I think, as a basis, we have incredibly good water legislation in South Africa. It's been a model for many other parts of the world as well. So our challenges really have been around enforcement and around capacity to implement it as effectively as we'd like. So for us as WWF and for many of our partners, it is about making sure that that implementation happens, and also that our strategic water source areas are protected through our different policy kind of initiatives, both directly in the water space, but also strategic water source areas are one of the 4 mechanisms to help us achieve our global biodiversity framework commitments in South Africa. So really integrating water into other decision-making beyond the sort of core water space as well, whether that be through Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment or through agriculture, etc. So I think integrating water more centrally into a number of other kind of capacities and spaces is really critical. And I think that's part of what the various partnerships are starting to do as well.
Thank you, Justin. Peter, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, to just understand that the water partners is a partnership. So we don't necessarily play a strong role in terms of lobbying or advocacy, but rather trying to align with what we see as the key levers in terms of achieving the results that we're looking to achieve collectively with government. So I mean, we've given some indications earlier. I think collectively we've agreed with what good projects would look like, good programs would look like, and typically supported the implementation of those projects. So as you just go through this, particularly in the municipal space, we talked about the no drop policy. So that was one area of both identification, but then support. We've also supported with creating what they call performance-based contracts, standard guidelines and templates for use by municipalities. We've also supported by doing non-revenue water studies to see what the potential for these projects are for PPPs. And then we've also done some work around the creation of a non-revenue water fund. So I think less of an advocacy role. We try to leave the pure advocacy to the business bodies that do exist for that function, but rather try to find the areas of commonality and try to work on implementation of those activities.
Thanks, Peter. And I guess holding to account through the research that you're doing and the performance contracts and stuff like that. Okay, I'm going to move on to some of the questions that we've had come in. I do encourage all of you to put more questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to start with one from Bruce Langford that's addressed to Justin regarding the healthy catchment water sources. So he says that there's lots coming from non-profit organizations, local government and communities. How important are companies, businesses, in delivering sustainable catchment areas, and how best can companies do this or get involved?
Thanks very much, Bruce. So I think for many years in South Africa, there was quite a reliance on kind of government funding, particularly through the Working for Water program, to do a lot of the aid and clearing and related work. And those budgets have been under threat and challenged somewhat. So corporate funding into key kind of catchments and really supporting the catchment economy has become really central as a result of that. So I think for many businesses, we start by really helping them understand their water risk and which areas are the priorities in terms of the risks for their operations or value chain or investments, and then really look at how we can, support resilience activities within those key catchments that are related to that particular business. So some of the companies have very specific replenishment targets or kind of water neutral targets, as Peter referred to earlier as well. And that can be one link in terms of really creating that understanding and connection into a kind of key upper catchment. And then working with them to really improve the ecological infrastructure that exists in those catchments, the wetlands, the grasslands, and others that really supply water. I think that's one of the big thematics for us is we both need our physical water infrastructure working effectively, and I think we've spoken quite a bit about that, but we also need our ecological infrastructure working effectively as the start of that water journey. And that's really where we've tried to focus in with a number of our partners and stakeholders. And I think that business role has become more and more significant in terms of the need for funding and also the benefits that companies are seeing, both from an environmental perspective, but also, again, from a social implication in terms of job creation, in terms of small business development, in terms of community-based nurseries and other opportunities that then exist within that catchment.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, I think you've made it clear that there's definitely a role for companies and businesses in working on those catchment areas, and multiple benefits beyond just the reducing or mitigating some of that water risk. I am still seeing quite a lot of questions coming in on the chat, but I'm going to take one from the Q&A from Sipakazi Koyana around interventions at a school level. I'm not sure if Rand Water Foundation or WWF, if you're doing any interventions at a school level. This Sipakazi in particular is working in the Eastern Cape, but what do water interventions at a school level look like? Mashudu, do you have any?
Yes, thank you, Kathy. In terms of the intervention, as I've also indicated in my introduction, that the school sanitation and water supply, which is one of the activities that we're undertaking in different schools, where we are assisting schools in terms of the drilling of boreholes, especially in rural areas where you still find schools that don't have running water. And secondly, in terms of Rainwater Foundation's intervention, is the ablution facilities, the construction of ablution facilities. There have been some studies, especially in rural areas, that actually shown, the dangers of these pit latrines, especially in schools where you still find pit latrines and, children drowning there. So our intervention here, we are actually bringing in and constructing ablution facilities that are dignified and making sure that, children are safe. So as a rainwater intervention, that was the key interventions that we are actually implementing in different schools, but also the rainwater harvesting, which plays a major role in terms of conserving water. That's where we have actually assisted schools, about 80 schools in Gauteng, where we assisted them in actually installing the water harvesting systems. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Mashudu. You've raised the important point of sanitation, and I see we've got Philip Majeki on the as one of the delegates on the line from the Water Research Commission, talking about World Toilet Day on the 19th of November and just the importance of sanitation. Justin, I don't know if you've got anything to add around schools. Mashudu's spoken to the infrastructure, the provision of boreholes, of toilets, rainwater harvesting. And I guess this comes back to that education and awareness issue. Is there other work happening in schools?
I think there's been a lot of efforts over the years to kind of broaden the environmental focus within the curriculum. And that's continuing at the moment. So I think the more we can build in an understanding around some of the water challenges we face and some of the potential solutions and the related careers that exist around them, the better. We're not involved in anything systemic at that level at the moment. We're focusing more on the kind of graduate space in terms of our WWF Environmental Leaders Program. But the school space is a critical entry point. And I think it's something we can look at working more effectively together around as well.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, Kathy, maybe just on the schools, sorry to interrupt, but we haven't personally been involved, but we've seen good examples of water demand projects with schools. For example, in Nelson Mandela Bay, there was the Doctor School program. You can imagine a school principal's problem is not if he's got water leaking, but if he doesn't have water. So there was definitely the opportunity where businesses partnered with schools to stop leaks within the schools. But obviously, a big part of non-revenue water interventions is education and awareness. So a lot of effort goes into working with local schools on creating the awareness of what water means to people. What can you do to improve it? And seemingly a lot of the results from non-revenue water interventions come from influencing behavior rather than just stopping the leaks. So schools is a very key entry point, almost to get your kids to start policing the adults on their own use of water. Very, very important area of reducing water demand.
Thanks, Peter. And isn't that true on most environmental issues? Get the kids to police the adults. And I see in the chat, Karen has mentioned a program called Enviro Champs. training local community members in environmental awareness and water sampling. So I think there are initiatives happening around the country in this regard. Mashudu, I just wanted to come back to the response. So one of your major focuses is obviously on infrastructure, firstly on building new infrastructure, boreholes, toilets, but also on maintaining or repairing aging infrastructure. How can other CSI programs support Rand Water in its infrastructure and maintenance efforts?
Oh, yes, thank you, Kathy. The issue of aging infrastructure is quite a difficult one, and CSI programs, we can play a significant role in supporting Rand Water's efforts in infrastructure maintenance and development, particularly in the areas that are under-resourced. Firstly, Kathy, the issue of funding for infrastructure projects, the bowls and water distribution systems, as I've indicated, that the CSI programs can provide funding to drill boreholes and install or repair water distribution systems in rural and under-resourced communities. This addresses the immediate need for water access, reducing dependence on distant and unreliable water resources. And secondly, the issue of sanitation and infrastructure in terms of hygiene. And besides water supply, the proper sanitation is a major concern, of course, and CSI's initiatives can finance the construction of upgrading sanitation facilities, and especially in sports clinics and informal settlements. But also the issue of public-private partnerships, Kathy, it's quite important in making sure that the funding is actually allocated, because you know that as public institutions, we don't have enough, but through collaboration with the other partners, your public-private partnerships, we can be able to raise funding for maintenance and this infrastructure development, which are quite exorbitant in terms of pricing, but also that will actually assist us a lot in making sure that we construct more and we actually deal with infrastructure in different areas and in areas where we cannot reach. Thank you.
Thanks, Mashudu. I see a question now coming, a second question from Bruce, which I know you've responded to, Justin, but I think I'm going to read it out because I'd like any of our three panelists to touch on this. It hasn't been touched on yet. But he says, I read a lot these days about the circular economy applied to water and the need for more water recycling. We haven't spoken about that this morning. What does the panel make of significance given to water recovery and recycling? I don't know who wants to come in first on that one.
Happy to take it. I think there's no question that it's a huge opportunity in a water constrained environment at various levels. So, I think water reuse at a domestic and an industrial level really does make sense. I think it's been difficult to implement in the past, just from a commercial viability point of view. But as you start to see more and more difficult scenarios relating to water supply security, and you start to look at disruption and the cost that has, that's becoming much more viable. So there's lots of opportunities to do water reuse at a domestic and industrial level. And I know certainly at a municipal level, there's a lot of drive towards that type of intervention. I know in Cape Town, they've done it quite well. I remember when I was last at Century City, you could see how they were using grey water in that particular precinct. I know Urwat has been looking at it as well. But the reality of the situation is, at the end of the day, it needs to be funded. So you need to have a municipality that has the affordability to be able to drive these interventions, or to then to put it out as a PPP type contract with direct off-takers, if you're not going to use in the municipal setting. So definitely lots of opportunity in that space, a big drive towards that. And not only just water reuse, but then also looking at other types of desalination and the like as additional water supply types.
Thanks, Peter. Justin, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, very much agree with what Peter said. I think it's a pretty fundamental step in sort of self-sufficiency and kind of resilience for a number of different organizations. But I think, again, to say it's only part of really understanding the responsibility of a particular company from a water perspective. We also want that kind of collaborative approach, participation in the partnerships, looking beyond the physical boundaries of their operations or facilities in terms of the responsibility around water. So it's an important piece of the kind of solution, but it's not the entirety of what we'd like to see.
Thanks, Justin. So the reduce and the recycle or reuse, both obviously important elements. I'm going to go on to a question from Philip at the Water Research Council. He says, in our work at the SASTEP program on providing sanitation in schools, we noted that reliable water supply in rural areas is a challenge. So we resorted to closed loop sanitation systems, such that you treat water on site and reuse for flushing. Again, comes back to the circular or the reuse. This brought resilience and allowed schools to have waterborne sanitation in water-scarce areas. And then the question for you, Mashudu, is whether Rand Water Foundation has looked at these types of sanitation systems.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. We have looked in these types of sanitation systems. There are different technologies that we are actually implementing, including the one that just been mentioned here, which we are actually further exploring. But primarily, for now, we're actually concentrating in the low flush, but where there's no bulk sewer connection, we are actually resorting to actually construct the dry sanitation facilities in a form of EnviroLoo. That's what we are actually doing, but we are in a process of actually exploring what the participant has actually asked.
Thanks, Mashudu. I don't know if you know, Philip, but maybe you two can compare notes there on the different systems that are available, both waterless or water kind of reuse. I'm going to go to a question for you, Peter, from Ivy, asking what is the situation on the ground with regards to the no drop program?
Yeah, so maybe just to point you, there is the no drop report is obviously published on the web. If you want to go look for it for any of the details, it's really best shown by showing an image that's put into that report, which obviously I can't really do now. But the last no drop scores are done in 2023. Just looking at the map here, you will see a large of the country is covered by municipalities that are in critical, poor, average, or just have no audit data whatsoever. There are some limited areas where there's good and excellent, but generally the state of individual municipal no drop scores is not particularly fantastic. From a national water balance point of view, which is really what this was at an overall viewpoint trying to do, there's concern around non-revenue water, with non-revenue water being at 47 and to nearly 47.5%, of which 40% out of that is water losses. So it's a very concerning stat. You would want to be, I think, global best practice, you try to target around 15-20%, I think is a good number. So not an easy situation, and I think what's concerning is the gradual increase. You'll see in the report again the gradual increase over the last since the last no drop report. There has been a steady decline in the non-revenue water situation, and I guess getting worse. So that report is available. Feel free to go find it and read through it at your leisure.
Thanks, Peter. Sure. I know I also mentioned that in the intro, but almost half of our water getting lost or non-revenue, as you term it. That's huge, and obviously an area that needs. And you've mentioned there's a big area of your focus at the partnership. I wanted to come back to Mashudu now, and Peter, this kind of measures water loss and non-water revenue across different municipalities and at a national level. Mashudu, how do you measure the impact of your water programs at the Rand Water Foundation?
Oh, thank you, Kathy, for the question. The Rand Water Foundation actually measures the impact of its water management projects through a combination of qualitative and quantitative approaches. And I'm going to be mentioning those as to how do we then measure in terms of the key performance indicators. The first one being water savings, Kathy. We track the amount of water saved through initiatives like leak detection, installation of water efficient devices, or adoption of water saving technologies. And this could include the reduction in water usage at schools and in clinics or households, as well as water losses reductions in municipal water systems. And secondly, Kathy, the infrastructure improvements, which are measurable, which make sure that they are measurable and improve water infrastructure, such as a number of boreholes that we have drilled, that will actually indicate the amount of water that is servicing the communities. And also, secondly, Kathy, is the baseline and the post-project assessments. The baseline surveys, we conduct those baseline surveys before starting the project, and Rainwater Foundation conducts baseline surveys to understand the pre-existing water conditions in the targeted communities or sectors, and this may include data or water access, quality consumption patterns, and infrastructure conditions. And post-project evaluations, which are quite significant. After implementing a project, Kathy, the Rainwater Foundation, we undertake the post-project assessments conducted to measure changes in these conditions. And these evaluations help Rainwater Foundation determine the effectiveness of interventions and measure improvements in water availability, usage, efficiency, and community health. The social impact assessment is also significant in a form that the communities will give us feedback. And as the foundation, it involves the local community in assessing the social impact of its project, and community members provide feedback on how water management initiatives have improved their quality of lives, particularly in terms of health and hygiene and access to clean water. This feedback also assists Rainwater Foundation understand the practical impact of projects on a daily living, on a daily basis. And lastly, Chiketi, the behavioral changes. The foundation measures changes in water consumption behavior as a result of educational campaigns or new water savings technologies. For instance, schools and households may be surveyed to determine if they are adopting water conservation practices or if awareness programs have led long-term changes in water usage habits. But it's also important, Kathy, in my conclusion, that the Rainwater Foundation employs a comprehensive, multifaceted approach to measuring the impact of its water management projects by combining quantitative metrics such as water savings and quality improvement with qualitative assessments such as community feedback and behavioral changes. Rainwater Foundation ensures that the projects are not only delivering immediate benefits, but also contribute to long-term water sustainability and resilience. And with continuous monitoring, stakeholder engagement, and alignment with national and local objectives, help Foundation redefine its approach and ensure that initiatives have lasting, long positive impacts. Kathy, thank you.
Thanks, Mashudu, for that comprehensive answer. I think it's important that you've highlighted there you measure not only the water savings, which is obviously the most direct measure here, but also the impact on people's lives and the behavior change. Justin, I don't know if you want to add to that around how WWF measures the impact of your work in this area.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, it really is critical, obviously, for supporters and funders and for the beneficiaries for us to understand that impact properly and be able to really verify it as well, particularly from a replenishment perspective, but also in terms of the social impact around the job days of work created and the small business development as well. So we've got a number of tools that we use, particularly on the alien clearing side in terms of the replenishment side. And a number of the kind of supporters do get those audited. We've also looked at it a little bit more systemically. So we've done a state of the strategic water source areas report using the Southern Drakensberg as the kind of key understanding area for that, really to get an idea of the sort of 50 different particular KPIs that really would classify what a healthy catchment looks like and what's required around it, both in terms of the environmental and kind of community sides of things. So the kind of monitoring, evaluation, and learning around this work is really, really central and really important in being able to share it across different localities and different water source areas, and making sure that we have that kind of sharing between projects and between different kind of coordinating bodies is also a really important part of this work for us.
Thanks, Justin. And I think it's a good point. Mashudu, we'd love to share some of your evaluations on the Knowledge Hub. We have the case studies of the project. And similarly, Justin, to point towards your report on the state of the water sources, and Peter, your no drop report. I think we need to add those all to our hub and to this to the write up of this webinar, because sharing that type of information is obviously going to help everyone on this call.
Yeah, Kathy, maybe just to add one, and we're fairly aligned on exactly what you said about water security, economic development, job creation, local communities, etc. But there's another one as well, which is really about contributing to the long-term sustainability of our municipalities, which actually is the key problem in our instance in municipalities that we're trying to deal with. So that there are other benefits, obviously, as well, that are probably more difficult to measure, but are critical in terms of long-term sustainability.
Thanks, Peter. And I see, yeah, support in the chat for sharing at least links to the various research studies that you've all mentioned, and the evaluations, Mashudu, that you've mentioned. I want to come on to the topic of youth engagement. We've mentioned schools, and we've mentioned some job creation programs. Peter, I don't know if you want to start, and then we'll go around the panelists, but just in terms of how you involve youth in the network, in the partnership, if at all, and how your thoughts on how CSI programs could better involve the youth in water management.
Yeah, so I think just to go back to what I said earlier about youth and education and awareness, I think is obviously a key component just from one level. I guess we don't have as strong a focus as we would like on this, and we'd rather try to work with organizations that are better at this than us. But maybe what we do notice is the opportunity for participation in the projects that actually come to market. And this is a personal view, not necessarily one of the network, but I think there's been lots of opportunities in the past where there's been a lot of skills development, training, and the like. It's been done through various initiatives, but I guess its fundamental flaw was the ability to absorb those skills, whether it be youth jobs, youth opportunities, or more skilled type opportunities. So for us, the way to really leverage the youth contribution is to make sure that you're bringing projects to market that are funded and resourced and have the ability to bring in these types of youth opportunities. Once you have the resourcing, you can be very deliberate about it, through procurement mechanisms or through the way that you design the program and the intervention, to really ensure that, first of all, the opportunity is created, but then in a way that can be sustainable and is not just a one-off project. That's often the challenge where particularly in local youth type programs, that they're not transferable to other locations. So you have to be very deliberate about how you design them to ensure that there's longevity around the initiative that you have created.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to throw this to Justin then, and particularly your point around creating sustainability or longevity. Justin, I don't know if your the job creation around the clearing alien species program that you mentioned is particularly targeted at youth, but for a program like that, how do you ensure kind of sustainability or longevity?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. It's a really critical point. I think generally in sort of internships and kind of entrepreneurial journeys, there is that danger of just kind of supporting something for a period of time and then it kind of falling off the platform, which is really, really sad. With the alien clearing work, because of the sort of what I spoke about earlier around the government funding kind of challenges, using the sort of corporate support to try and kind of bridge those gaps and smooth out the longevity of the programs of work has been really critical. But I think the other side is also recognizing we've got to move beyond kind of grant funding reliance in a number of these different programs and look at different financing mechanisms, either through what the end product is of kind of alien clearing programs, or through different support mechanisms as well. We're also trying to make sure that across the strategic water source partnerships, we look at kind of youth employment and youth champions who are developed out of a number of the different villages that we work with partners in, as one of the mechanisms to kind of support hopefully rural job creation opportunities. It's a small scale, but it's also an important kind of coordinating activity in the strategic water source area partner work. But I think this for me, this particular webinar has really kind of pushed an important button around how we kind of align better in terms of the youth space from a water perspective. I know there's a number of more kind of formal organizations supporting youth scientists in the water space and others, but I think getting to that point is where the gaps are right now, and where we can all work more effectively around it.
Thanks, Justin. Mashudu, do you want to add to that? Based on, you mentioned some of your, and again, I don't know if they specifically targeted youth, but your job creation, leak detection programs, things like that. Do you want to comment on the involvement of youth?
Yes, as a Rainwater Foundation, Kathy, we were able to actually train about 240 young people in terms of artisanship and plumbing. So these young people are actually assisting us in terms of the infrastructure development. And then when it comes to domestic water leaks, we are actually utilizing their services. And secondly, through SMMEs and NGOs, capacitation of small, medium enterprises, they are also given opportunities to actually bid. And most of them that are actually implementing this project, they are companies that are actually youth orientated. And in terms of NGOs also, that's where we are actually identifying NGOs that are actually youth-led, that are actually assisting us in all these projects that we are actually undertaking, from your drilling of boreholes, dignified sanitation facilities, school sanitation and water supply, as well as wetlands rehabilitation. I must also indicate that there was some work that we have been done previously with regards to wetlands rehabilitation and the alien vegetation removal, where we actually utilized youth participation and encourage them to actually get those opportunities, Kathy. So that's what the Rainwater Foundation has done in the previous years, and we are currently doing, and in terms of skills development and training as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mashudu. Just a note to delegates, last chance to put a question in the Q&A box. I'm going to ask Peter about Gauteng and Mashudu now. But if you do have a last question, please put it in before we close. So Peter, I know you mentioned earlier that we'd move on to the Gauteng Water Security Initiative later. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that now.
Yeah, thanks. So there has been a Gauteng water security platform that's been recently created over the last few months. Obviously, you'll see more and more in the press about the situation we find ourselves in Gauteng, and as certainly as a resident, you'll start to feel more and more outages and the like, which is of concern. So this has very much been driven by the Department of Water to create a platform of all the correct stakeholders, be it Rand Water, be it the municipalities, at a first level to try and understand the information in the situation, but importantly then to start towards driving action. So it has a number of key focus areas. One is around communications and information and data related to the communications. And then the other two relate to reducing water demand, and then obviously the funding of those water demand reduction projects. So I think to the people participating in the call, from an information point of view, has been the first focus area. We're looking to really bring down demand, and the reality is that is driven by consumers at a primary level. So we do advocate for that. We do recognize that there are many challenges, but it does create the opportunity for us to behave as best possible to collectively reduce water demand. In that light, you will see that I think it was last week the first dashboard was published. So it is available. Kathy, happy to share it with you, and we can put into your data portal as well. But that that information dashboard is the first attempt to try and get transparency on what the situation is related to water supply and demand in the area, also providing tools to people in terms of what they can do both individually at a business level, whilst we look at the more bigger play projects related to municipal infrastructure.
Thanks, Peter. Mashudu, do you want to come in on that and Rand Water's role in this initiative in Gauteng, and then also how companies could contribute?
Oh, yes, we have been in communication with Peter in terms of activities in Gauteng, in terms of water demand management, and they will be working together in the area of Alexander, especially in the area of Alexander, we will be doing the retrofitting, the water leaks detection, in partnership with NEPAD as well, and other key stakeholders. So it's quite significant, and it's quite noticeable that they will be doing actually some work within Gauteng in terms of leaks detection and retrofitting. Thank you.
Thanks, Mashudu. Fanana Luando asks, is there a possibility of new dams around Gauteng?
Yeah, it's a. I talk as a layman, but you know, again, what that will talk to is what the key influence is. So Gauteng is obviously one of the big areas that's not developed on a water resource. So the bulk of our water comes from integrated Vaal River system, and particularly from WWF's domain in Lesotho. So the Lesotho Highlands water scheme is where a lot of our water comes from. There have unfortunately been delays in implementing that. So I guess the additional dams type play relates to the water supply that will come out of Lesotho at this point, 2028. So I'm not sure what the latest thinking is, but that was certainly my understanding is 2028 will be first delivery of additional water from Podihadi Dam, which is the new dam being built in Lesotho. So up until then, we are under pressure to ensure that we manage our water as wisely as possible, both for livelihoods, but also for commercial activities.
Thanks, Peter. This is the last question I'm going to take from delegates, from Philip Majeke again, saying, and I think, Mashudu, you touched a bit on this, but if anyone else wants to come on this point, most CSI seems to focus on CapEx projects, so the infrastructure side. Is there an opportunity to focus more on serving and maintenance, as this will also be value for money? Mashudu, I know you touched on this. Do you want to add anything?
Yes, I know that as the Rainwater Foundation, we are not only focusing on CapEx projects, but as the foundation, there are community projects that I just mentioned earlier on, in terms of infrastructure development in schools, in terms of the construction of ablution facilities. Kathy has indicated that those infrastructure development, they are not CapEx in nature, but you know, they are CSI funded. And also, we're also working with other role players in the space, wherein we are actually collaborating and raising, you know, funding for this initiative to be a success. So in responding to that, yes, the foundation is actually doing that at a small scale, but not in a form of a CapEx project. So opportunities do exist within the foundation in terms of those construction activities and other water-related infrastructure.
Thanks, Mashudu. I think you're right. There is a lot of opportunity there, Philip. So thanks for raising that. And I think companies that are in this area, like the Rand Water Foundation, are looking at both the CapEx and the other types of programs. Okay, we're almost out of time. So I'm going to move on to our panelists' closing statements, where I would just like them to provide 1 or 2 recommendations for companies and nonprofits on how to consider or to include water management strategies in their CSI or in their social impact work. Justin, I'm going to start with you, please.
Sure, Kathy. So I think probably 2 things. One, to look at the connections to your core business if you're in the corporate space or your value chain, and kind of start from there. I think if you're in the NGO sector, Kathy, you shared some of the connections from a Trialogue perspective earlier in terms of water is not only an environmental issue, it's a health issue, it's an infrastructure issue, it's a kind of job creation issue. So look at how to integrate water into other aspects of your work as a kind of key lever to engage some of these partnerships we've spoken about. And then again, I think that collaboration is really critical. certainly we've seen with a number of the companies in the same sector who work together with us on water issues. Water is a pre-competitive space. It's so critical as an issue for us. It's not a competition area. And I think the kind of partnership space as an NGO, with other NGOs, with businesses, etc., is really critical in trying to solve the challenges we face. Thanks.
Thanks, Justin. Peter, I'm going to hand over to you for some closing statement and recommendation.
Yeah, so I think for us, like I've mentioned, we've done quite a lot of work on municipal water partnerships. And I think, having followed the trend in the energy space over the last few years, we're getting, I think everybody as a society getting more and more concerned about water. Just to note that there are opportunities, there are very good opportunities to support municipalities. And the aha moment for us is the fact that you can cross-subsidize what would appear to be more operational budget type projects with CSI opportunities. So again, just a point, in Gauteng specifically, we're working with Joburg Water on a number of potential non-revenue water projects. If businesses have water risk, they can potentially look to their CSI to support these types of projects. In the event that they are able to create job creation, they're able to create local businesses, they're able to be looked at from a health point of view, like I said, from hospitals, or from an education point of view, from schools or universities. And there are many different ways to look at this, to leverage CSI spend and have multiple benefits. Not for us, our primary is around water savings and water demand and water security, but there are multiple benefits in the space. But most importantly, there's the opportunity to make it sustainable by working in a non-revenue water fund type opportunity. Mashudu mentioned Alex project, which we cooperating on with Rainwater Foundation and other corporates. It is a large project, but through a very small, relatively small contribution, we're able to run a full program over a number of phases. And the simple fact that the initial contribution starts to fund the future phases. So it's a really great model, really worth investigating more if you have an interest, and happy to take offline anybody who wants to have a discussion about it.
Thanks, Peter. So lots of opportunity for everyone on the line to get involved somehow. Mashudu, I'm going to give you the last word, and just to thank again the Rainwater Foundation for their sponsorship of this vitally important topic. But if you could close off with some recommendations for our delegates.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Foundation's collaboration with a diverse range of stakeholders, Kathy, it therefore enables us to address water scarcity issues in a comprehensive and sustainable manner. And Kathy, by partnering with governments, the private sector, NGOs, and local communities, we can leverage for resources, knowledge, and expertise, and to implement impactful water management projects. And these partnerships are quite significant for scaling solutions, building resilience, and ensuring that South Africa's water resources are managed effectively for future generations. And also to mention that there are opportunities that exist within the foundation. I think I've mentioned a lot. The NGOs and the SMMEs that are capable are actually welcomed to make applications when we publish this advert, so that they can also be empowered and get opportunities. Kathy, thank you.
Thank you, Mashudu. And thank you again to all of our panelists. I think your insights have been really great. A reminder to everyone on the line that we will be distributing in about a week's time a short write-up of this webinar, as well as the recording. And we will include links to all of the various research and publications that have been mentioned by our panelists. So thank you for joining us. Thanks for your engagement and all the questions. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next one next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.